Good morning and welcome to the Praeteritum channel. This channel presents series about civilizations and historical periods. This is the channel's first series, Rome, from the origins to the fall of the Western Empire. In this first video, we won't dive directly into the history of Rome but will explore its legends. In fact, the first videos will be short, between 15 and 25 minutes, in which we will explore the legends and their interpretations. These early videos, being more speculative, will sometimes include my personal opinion alongside those of historians. However, whenever I share my opinion, as in the second video, which will be entirely speculative, I will let you know. You learned about Rome the wrong way. In school, at least in my case, they showed some maps, talked about a few wars, and that was it. The real importance of Rome was not conveyed. Our politics, our form of government, and modern democracy have more in common with the Roman Republic than with Athenian democracy. Our idea of citizenship and civil rights is also Roman. The Romans organized marches, strikes, and protests. They fought for political and civil rights, and they won them. This is the Rome I want to show. Not the Rome of marching legions or spoiled emperors, but Roman culture, its economy, its psyche. I'm not sure if I'm up to the task, but I will try and improve along the way. I hope you'll join me throughout this series if you have the patience. The legend of the founding of Rome does not begin in the Italian peninsula, but in Anatolia, in the city of Troy, while it was being sacked by the Greeks. At that moment, Aeneas, a Trojan prince, actually from Dardania, gathers a group of compatriots and leads them out of the city to safety. They set sail in search of a new land. After various adventures, they arrive in Latium, where they unite with the local people through the marriage of Aeneas to Lavinia, daughter of Latinus, the king of the region. Aeneas then founds a city for the Trojans called Lavinium in honor of his wife. Ascanius, Aeneas's son, inherits the throne of Lavinium but abandons the city and founds Alba Longa, which he governs, as do his descendants, for 12 generations. However, the throne, which should have passed to Numitor, is usurped by Amulius, his brother. Amulius orders the death of Numitor's sons and forces his daughter Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal, a virgin priestess. However, she appears pregnant, claiming that the father of the children is Mars, the god of war. Faced with this, Amulius orders that Rhea Silvia's twins be thrown into the Tiber River. However, the person tasked with the job, instead of drowning the children, places them in a basket which ends up stranded on the riverbank. The twins, Romulus and Remus, are nursed by a she-wolf, and later found by a shepherd, who raises them as his own sons. As they grow up, they become leaders of a group of young warriors, or perhaps shepherds who also engaged in raiding. Later, the brothers meet Numitor, discover their true origins, and, with their grandfather's help, defeat Amulius, returning the throne to Numitor. They then decide to found a city where the she-wolf had found them. This is where the problems begin. Romulus and Remus disagree about where to build the city. Romulus prefers the Palatine Hill, while Remus favors the Aventine Hill. It's important to note that the region where Rome is located was then a hilly area with several elevations. The solution? Simple. Romulus kills Remus. Now, as the sole ruler of Rome, a name Romulus gives the city in his own honor, he faces the first problem: the city's low population, which consists only of Romulus and his companions. To solve this, Romulus transforms Rome into a refuge for criminals, debtors, the poor, and runaway slaves, a place for a fresh start. Thus, the outcasts of Italy flock to the city, seeking a new chance, and Rome becomes overcrowded with people. Unable to govern the city alone, Romulus selects 100 men from among the Romans, giving them the title of senators and the mission of helping him govern. These first senators were given the title of patres by the Romans, meaning fathers, due to the great prestige they held among the people. With the population issue resolved, the Romans realized that there are no women in the city. The large number of marginalized men, there were more criminals than in California, made families avoid moving to Rome. To address this, Romulus tries to negotiate with neighboring cities, proposing treaties that would allow Romans to marry women from these communities, and eventually, men from these places could marry Roman women. However, the plan fails. No father or brother in their right mind would allow their daughters to marry such disreputable men. According to Livy, the Roman envoys were dismissed from the Latin cities with rudeness, and the local leaders mockingly suggested that the Romans open an asylum for women. This enraged the Romans, who began seeking revenge for the insult. The opportunity came with a festival organized by Romulus, seemingly to show the neighbors that Rome held no grudge. This was a lie. During the event, Romulus ordered his men to attack the guests and capture all the young women, especially the Sabines, as they had come with their families. Unlike the other guests who arrived in groups of friends or alone, what followed was a war between the Romans and the Sabines, as well as other communities of Latium, due to the severity of the Roman act. However, the lack of coordination among the allies allowed Rome to defeat each city individually. Finally, a Sabine coalition led by Titus Tatius attacked Rome. When it seemed that both armies were about to engage in a decisive and bloody battle, the Sabine women interposed themselves between the forces, expressing their willingness to die rather than witness the deaths of their fathers and husbands. This gesture moved the Sabine and Roman leaders so much that they not only made peace but also united the two communities, with Romulus and Titus Tatius as co-kings. However, this CO rule did not last long, as Titus Tatius, accused of dishonesty, was assassinated in Lavinium. Romulus once again became the sole ruler of Rome, now also governing the Sabines living in the city. The life of Romulus includes several other wars, all won by Rome. In his old age, one day, while inspecting the troops with the senators, a dense fog descended, and when it cleared, Romulus had disappeared. The senators told the people that the king had been taken by the fog and had become a god. However, Livy mentions that there was also speculation that the senators might have assassinated Romulus, fearing he would become a tyrant. How did Aeneas, this character from Greek mythology, become part of the Roman foundational legend? In the 5th century BC, Aeneas appears as a possible founder of Rome, but why? Because Rome came to be, for the Greeks, the most likely new Troy. What I mean is that, in the Iliad, there is a prophecy stating that Aeneas would one day rule Troy. However, the city was destroyed by the Greeks, and in the 5th century, there was no new city in the region, because for Aeneas to rule Troy, he would have had to rebuild it after its destruction by the Greeks. The Greeks, therefore, adapted the interpretation of the prophecy. Aeneas did not necessarily need to rebuild Troy, he could have built a new Troy. At that time, the best candidate for that was Rome. When this idea reached the Romans, I don't know if this hypothesis came from the Greeks before the Romans considered it, or if it originated among the Romans and later reached the Greeks. Either way, the Romans adopted it, in part. In the Roman legend, Aeneas is not the founder of Rome itself but of Lavinium, the metropolis that gave rise to Rome. The idea of Aeneas in the legend of Romulus and Remus is a graft of a Greek myth onto a local one, that of the twins. Aeneas is just the most striking example of Rome equating itself with a Greek colony. Remember when I called Lavinium the metropolis of Rome? This happens because the legend can be interpreted in light of the influence Greek culture had in the region. I will have to tell you a bit about the history of Greek colonization in Italy to explain the parallels with the foundation of Rome. At the end of the 12th century BC, Greece entered a period known as the Greek Dark Ages. This period followed the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, and lasted from that time until roughly the 8th century BC, more specifically after the second half. During the early part of the Dark Ages, there was significant mortality, and there was no possibility of growth, or perhaps even stabilization at first. The disorder which caused this mortality led people to abandon their lands, resulting in the collapse of the economy and more deaths from famine probably. The fact is that the disorder, the abandonment of fields and the collapse of the economy transformed, if not all Greeks then a large portion of them, into nomads or semi-nomads, who lived primarily from herding. When the situation stabilized and it became safe or moderately safe to settle down again and thus resume agriculture, which, along with writing, had been lost during the early part of the Dark Ages, there were few people for many lands. As a result, the Greeks simply claimed fields. Imagine a family fencing off an ownerless field, having children, and those children, once adults, fencing off more fields, and so on until the 8th century, or rather, the second half of that century. By this time, the Greek Dark Ages had already come to an end. However, despite relative stability and security, if before there had been too much land for too few people, now there was too little free land for too many people. In this context, land meant food security. Those who owned land had a relative guarantee that they would have food tomorrow, the next day, the next month, and the next year. Of course, landowners could be killed in war or enslaved, but in the turbulent world of the 8th century BC, owning land was a significant security. If you like, you can think of something similar happening today, like how boomers monopolize home ownership and prevent younger generations from buying houses at reasonable prices by restricting construction in their Neighborhoods. I believe this is your housing problem, right? I'm from Brazil and our problems are different. Well, a significant conflict arose, a generational tension between those who monopolized land ownership and the new generation that wanted land. Something similar, but probably worse considering the time and situation, happened in Greece, where a tension emerged between landowners and those who wanted land. Don't think of heroes and villains. Everyone just wanted to survive. However, a third class also emerged, consisting of people who didn't own land but were not in need either. On the contrary, these people prospered. They were the class of overseas merchants, operating primarily in the eastern Mediterranean. At that time they felt the urge to expand their markets, and following the example of the Phoenicians, they sought expansion in the west. In the 77 OS BC, around 770 BC, the Greeks founded their first colony in Italy, on the island of Ischia in the Bay of Naples. This was not a state colony, even though the concept of state at that time and in that region is somewhat nebulous, but a trading post, similar to the Portuguese feitorias of the 15th and 16th centuries, used as a base for merchants to introduce their products into the region. Another colony that serves as an example is the city of Tarentum, a Spartan colony founded in 736 BC. Now the legendary year of Rome's foundation is 752 or 3 or 4 BC. Notice how close these dates are. The founding of Rome roughly coincides with the beginning of Greek occupation to the south of Latium. When governments realized that these trading posts were successful, they began establishing their own state-controlled posts, which, in addition to serving as commercial hubs, also acted as a safety valve for the growing and increasingly tense Greek population. These colonies were used to remove marginal elements from the cities, like in the case of Tarentum, to which Sparta sent its illegitimate children, and potentially dangerous individuals. Notice how this is similar to the riffraff that Romulus, according to legend, called to Rome. They were the outcasts of the region seeking a new life. Romulus himself, in fact, parallels the Catistes, a public official whose mission was to found the colony, distribute land to the settlers, and, if I'm not mistaken, govern it initially. As in the legend, in real life, most of these settlers were men. Women did not go to the colonies, and the men had to find wives among the local communities, either through diplomatic means, when relations with the natives were good, or by raiding local villages, as in the legend of the Sabine women. In other words, Rome in its legends tries to present itself as a Greek colony, the connection with Troy, and thus with Greece through Lavinium and Alba Longa, probably exists because these two places were Latin religious centers. As their importance diminished, for example, when the Latin religious center shifted to Aricia, the memory of these two cities may have been inserted into the legend as Rome's mother cities, reflecting the former importance they held. That's all for today. Thank you for listening, and follow along for the next videos. Goodbye.